The fire pit. Not a warm place of light, but an abyss of stories buried in the darkness of war. The fire pit. The name sounds simple, familiar to the soldiers. A place they gather under the pitch-black sky, a cigarette flickering like a faint glimmer of hope in the midst of a nightmare. But don't let its simplicity fool you. It's the boundary between the living and things not of this world. There, as cigarette smoke mingled with the biting cold air, the terrifying stories began to surface. Not laughter or memories of victory, but trembling whispers of nameless figures, screams from the void, and glowing red eyes in the night. The fire pit wasn't just a resting place. It was a doorway to experiences human reason refuses to acknowledge. A veteran once told me, "Professor, you don't understand. Some things can kill you without a gun." And I believed him. Here, in the virtual space of wartime stories, I open that door to everyone, from seasoned, battle-hardened warriors to the curious who have never heard a gunshot. But this time, we will hear the accounts of 3 soldiers who encountered the inexplicable. First is Chris, a Canadian Army veteran, whose weathered face seems to bear the mark of sleepless nights in Afghanistan. After him is Sector S.O.S, the alias of an American soldier with eyes that constantly dart around as if still being hunted. And finally, Uriah, a U.S. Marine, whose voice still trembles recounting the memory. Chris begins his story in the bone-chilling cold of Kandahar Province, Afghanistan, in the late 2000s. He was part of Operation Athena, Canada's contribution to the ISAF coalition, where death came not only from the enemy, but also from unseen phantoms. Chris's company was a perfect war machine. Lava 3 armored vehicles roaring like beasts, heavy Leopard tanks crushing the earth, along with engineers and logistics ready for any situation. But no one was prepared for what awaited them in the darkness. The mission lasted 4 days, sweeping villages along the Arghandab River, an arid land where the wind howled through every rock crevice like the wailing of lost souls. The first night, they stopped in the middle of the dry riverbed, a clever tactic to spot the enemy from a distance. But the enemy, this time, wasn't human. The riverbed stretched about 550 yards wide, so exposed it made Chris's heart pound for no reason.
"I feel like someone's watching me,"
he whispered to his teammate over the radio, but only received a chuckle in return.
"Just your imagination, Chris."
The defensive formation was set up like a steel fortress in the desert, tanks and Levi 3s forming an impenetrable circle, barrels pointing into the thick darkness. Inside, the logistics vehicles huddled safely, or so they thought. Guard duty was divided equally. Vehicles at the 12, 3, 6 and 9 o'clock positions took the first watch. The crew, driver, gunner, vehicle commander, strained their eyes through thermal optics, scanning every shadow, every tiny movement in the night. "See anything?" Chris's vehicle commander asked, his voice hoarse from smoke and the cold. "Not yet," Chris replied, but his hand gripped the controls tighter, sweat breaking out even though the temperature outside was below freezing. Something was moving. Not Taliban, not wild animals, but a misshapen figure, abnormally tall. Every hour, the guard rotation shifted from one vehicle to another, like a deadly dance in the desert. But around 2 a.m., Chris's thermal sight flickered.
"I swear, it's not human,"
he yelled over the radio, his voice breaking in panic. The figure stood about 220 yards from the perimeter, nearly 10 feet tall. Its body was gaunt, but its impossibly long arms reached the ground. Through the thermal sight, It didn't give off a human heat signature. It was ice cold, like a corpse walking through the desert.
Skinwalker,
Chris muttered, remembering the terrifying stories his grandfather used to tell. Chris's teammates burst out laughing over the radio.
Are you crazy? There are no skinwalkers in Afghanistan.
But the laughter died when the turret of the adjacent vehicle rotated on its own, untouched, aiming straight at the figure. Then it vanished, as if it had never existed. Ethan continued the story, his deep voice seemingly pulling listeners into a bottomless pit. That guard procedure, with its cold steel circle in the desert, wasn't just protecting them from the Taliban. It was a desperate attempt to ward off unseen phantoms, nameless entities lurking in the dark night. After the defensive perimeter was established, the infantry soldiers dismounted, hastily digging shallow fighting positions in the shadow of the LAV-3. They didn't say it, but everyone wanted to avoid the biting cold of the metal and the feeling of being trapped in that iron coffin. Over the radio, the guard schedule crackled dryly.
Group 2, watch begins in 1 hour.
Chris, as vehicle commander, along with the gunner and driver, took the second shift. But a bad feeling had begun to grow inside him, as if tonight wouldn't be just another routine watch. Inside the LAV-3, the troop compartment was spacious but cold, the 2 rows of facing benches now empty. The infantrymen had chosen the dusty ground outside, leaving the benches for Chris and the gunner, a small luxury amidst the nightmare of war. The driver huddled in the driver's compartment, clutching his sleeping bag like a lifeline. With only an hour before their watch, all 3 decided not to sleep. Chris opened a worn-out old book, the weak flashlight beam making his shadow dance on the vehicle walls. The gunner stared at his phone screen while the driver immersed himself in the virtual world of his PSP. No one spoke, but the silence was heavy, as if someone was breathing down their necks.
You feel cold?
The gunner suddenly whispered, his voice lost in the static from his headset. Chris nodded. Though he knew this cold wasn't from the desert, it came from something else, something lurking out there. They tried to ignore it, but the air inside the vehicle began to thicken, becoming suffocating. Then, half an hour before their watch, the silence was shattered. A dull thud echoed, accompanied by a slight vibration, as if something heavy had just stepped onto the roof of the vehicle. Chris and the gunner jerked their heads up, hearts pounding.
Wind?
The driver mumbled, but his trembling voice betrayed his panic. No, it wasn't the wind. Footsteps, slow, deliberate, echoed clearly on the thick steel of the LAV-3. I've researched similar cases. That weight wasn't human, more like something not of this world. Chris and the gunner looked at each other, their eyes filled with a mixture of fatigue and fear. Probably just the sergeant coming to check, the gunner said, trying to reassure himself, but his hand had already tightened on the dagger beneath his sleeping bag. They sat up, waiting for the top hatch to pop open, waiting for the familiar shout. But nothing happened. No click of the hatch, no call, only silence. A thick, terrifying silence, worse than gunfire. Where was the thing that had just climbed onto the vehicle? Chris felt the hair on the back of his neck stand up, as if unseen eyes were drilling into him from the darkness. It didn't get off the vehicle, Chris whispered, his voice cracking in the confined space. The gunner frowned. You sure? I don't hear anything anymore. But they both knew. If it had left, they should have heard it jump down. The desert was so quiet that even the rustling of sand echoed like thunder. A sense of unease crawled over Chris, colder than the chill outside. He stood up, his trembling hand reaching for the top hatch. "I have to check," he said, though his instincts screamed at him to curl up like a child. The gunner grabbed his arm. "Don't, Chris, if it's not human." But he pushed it away, determined to open the hatch. The hatch popped open, and desert air rushed in, carrying the smell of dry sand and something foul, like the distant stench of decay. Chris stuck his head out, his eyes scanning the roof under the pale moonlight. His heart skipped a beat when he realized there was no one, nothing. Only a faint indentation on the steel, like the footprint of something that shouldn't exist. When Chris stuck his head out of the top hatch, he faced an unnervingly empty space. The vehicle roof was cold, thinly coated in dust, without a single footprint, not a breath. Only the pale moonlight shining on the soulless steel. Chris frowned, trying to push away the rising unease. It probably went towards the driver's hatch, he told himself, though deep down he knew that was unlikely. Determined not to let doubt gnaw at him further, he pushed the hatch open wide, climbing completely out, his breath misting in the cutting cold of the Kandahar night. He climbed onto the turret roof, the highest point of the Lavi 3, where he could survey the entire defensive circle. Under the dim starlight, he looked down at the driver's hatch. Empty. Not a soul, not a trace. The confusion in Chris now turned into an icy chill running down his spine. The armored vehicle was an angular block of steel with no crevices for someone to hide. He stood there, atop the turret, feeling as if the entire desert was staring at him. A tiny prey in the endless darkness. His eyes swept over the empty ground between the armored vehicles, the shallow pits where infantrymen huddled asleep, and further out, the dry riverbed, vast, silent, yet menacing. Not a movement, not a soul. "Damn it, how can it not be real when I have goosebumps like this?" he muttered, his breath shaky. Chris scrambled down, diving back into the vehicle through the top hatch, his face white as if he'd just seen a ghost. "There's no one out there," he said quickly to the gunner and driver. "But I swear, I heard something climb onto the vehicle." The gunner frowned. "You sure you weren't imagining things?" But Chris's eyes didn't lie. "Lock all the hatches, right now," Chris ordered, his voice low but sharp as a knife. No one objected. The clatter of locking bolts echoed in the compartment, but the tension still weighed heavily on them. What had been out there? An enemy? Or something that didn't need feet to move? From that moment on, the air inside the vehicle was suffocatingly thick. All three sat in silence, ears straining for the slightest sound. Their guard shift came, and they performed it with bloodshot eyes, weapons always within reach. When it was over, fitful sleep came, but no one truly rested. Fortunately, or rather a temporary peace, no more strange noises were heard that night. Don't celebrate too soon. Things like that don't just disappear. They wait. And the next morning, an even more chilling story from the driver proved it. The company left the encampment, heading towards the first village to sweep. Infantry dismounted. Lavi 3s took up covering positions, turrets rotating slowly like the eyes of hunting owls. When the radio frequency went quiet, the driver's voice suddenly came over the intercom, trembling as if about to cry, "I need to tell you guys something." He began, his voice lost in fear. Last night, between guard shifts, he couldn't sleep. To kill time, he opened his laptop, the pale blue light from the screen illuminating his tired face. "I was watching a movie, then suddenly I felt cold. Colder than the desert," he recounted, subconsciously touching the back of his neck. Then it happened. A hand, ice-cold, bony, rested on the back of his neck. Thin, unnaturally long fingers slowly stroked through his hair, deliberately, like a caress from the grave. I felt every finger distinctly, like cold stone, he said, eyes wide with panic. He whipped around, heart pounding, certain it was Chris or the gunner messing with him. "Who's there?" "That's a sick joke," he yelled, but the cramped driver's compartment was empty. Only him, the darkness, and the cold that still clung to his neck as if it had never left. That wasn't a joke. It was the mark of something that had chosen him. Initially, Chris and the gunner just chuckled when they heard the driver's story about the icy hand. "You're just adding spice for fun, right?" the gunner growled. But his eyes flickered, remembering the footsteps on the roof the night before. They thought he was overly stressed, or that fatigue had let his imagination run wild. But when the driver looked straight at them, his eyes bloodshot and his voice trembling, "I swear I felt those fingers." Neither of them could laugh anymore. His fear was real, like a cold knife slicing through the air. In the following days, as the Lavi 3 rolled through dusty villages and barren wasteland, a strange thought began to take root in the minds of all three. They whispered among themselves, "Could it be that this thing is attached to this vehicle?" I've seen similar cases. Inanimate objects sometimes become homes for restless spirits. They argued heatedly in the cramped vehicle compartment. "Should we check its history?" Chris asked, his voice laced with doubt. Lavs were often rotated through various units in Afghanistan, and who knew how many soldiers had died inside this very machine? "Maybe their spirits are still here?" the gunner mumbled, unconsciously touching the cold steel wall. But in the end, they chose silence. "It's best not to dig," Chris concluded, his voice heavy as if bearing guilt. They feared that opening that door would awaken something best left undisturbed. Sometimes, cowardice is the only way to survive the nameless things. Strangely, as if the entity heard their fear, no more sounds or cold hands appeared for the rest of the operation. The haunted vehicle, if it truly was haunted, temporarily fell silent. "Don't think it's gone. It's just waiting for its chance." From a U.S. serviceman using the alias Sector S.O.S. I was in Kunar Province, Afghanistan, 2010-2011. Kunar, a harsh land with towering mountains, where danger came not only from the enemy, but also from chilling legends. Locals whispered of ghosts on the mountaintops, while American soldiers spoke of things they saw in the night, things not found in military manuals. Sector S.O.S. continued. That night, two buddies and I were on guard duty at an observation post on a hill. Their mission was to monitor the dirt road below, a narrow path where the enemy could sneak through at any time. Under the dim starlight, the darkness seemed alive, hiding something unsettling. "Around midnight," he recounted, his voice starting to tremble, "we saw a shepherd boy leading 4 goats walking along the road." All 3 soldiers watched through night vision goggles, the green light clearly showing his small figure. "Looks normal," one teammate whispered. But then everything changed. Sector S.O.S. took off his night vision goggles, letting his naked eyes adjust to the darkness. He blinked, and the boy vanished. "What the hell?" he yelled, his voice breaking in panic. The goats were still there, walking slowly, but no one was leading them. "I swear, he was just there." He turned to his teammates, face pale. They tried again, putting the goggles back on. The boy reappeared clearly, ragged clothes, holding a stick. Took the goggles off. Nothing but 4 bewildered goats. It was a clear night, Sector S.O.S. explained. The naked eye could still see the goats, but the boy just dissolved into thin air. Ethan interjected. That wasn't an illusion. It was something only night vision could pick up. All 3 soldiers were stunned, hearts pounding in their chests. Did you see that? It's not real. One teammate stammered, but Sector S.O.S. shook his head. No, it's real. Just not of this world. They looked at each other, daring not to say more, afraid that words might summon it back. Sector S.O.S. still trembled, recalling, to this day, none of us can explain that night. He sat there, eyes distant, as if the phantom shepherd boy was still standing somewhere in his memory, staring at him. What convinced Ethan of this story was that all 3 soldiers, Sector S.O.S. and his 2 teammates, saw the same phenomenon. Individual hallucinations can be blamed on fatigue, but when 3 pairs of eyes witness the same thing, it's no longer a trick of the mind. They reported it up the chain of command, voices hesitant. We saw a boy, but he disappeared when we took off our night vision. The commander frowned, dismissing it. You guys are just tired and hallucinating. Their report was filed away, like so many other strange stories in the military, where logic must prevail, no matter how loudly the truth screams. But the phantom shepherd boy refused to rest. Rumors spread quickly through the unit, like a smoldering fire in the dark night. Did you hear? S.O.S. really saw a ghost, one soldier whispered. Eventually, the story reached the command sergeant major, the toughest man in the battalion, and he just scoffed. Ghosts in the middle of a war? Then, a week later, like a cruel joke of fate, all 3 soldiers were ordered for a drug test. Go now, no questions asked, the sergeant barked over the radio. Sector S.O.S. chuckled, recalling it. They thought we were high and seeing things, but all 3 of us were clean, not a drop of anything. The test results didn't extinguish the strangeness. That was the weirdest damn thing I ever encountered, Sector S.O.S. concluded, his voice heavy. You can say I was tired, I imagined it, but all 3 of us saw it for a full 20 minutes, until the goats disappeared from view. He mentioned the Petch Valley, where the incident occurred. Locals say the wind there whispers like human voices, he said, a flicker of old fear in his eyes. I've researched it. It could be EAP, electronic audio phenomena, a type of supernatural sound. But that boy was something else, not just the wind. I didn't hear any whispering, Sector S.O.S. admitted, but I swear, what I saw was real. Supernatural, no doubt about it. He shivered, as if the cold from that night still clung to his bones. From Uriah Steffenhagen, a former U.S. Marine. Uriah began, his voice low but sharp. I arrived in Afghanistan in 2011, just 20 years old. He was young, but war and its mysteries had etched timeless lines into his eyes. The event took place at Camp Dwyer, Helmand Province, a large base in the middle of the desert where death and strange tales intertwined. October or November, I think, Uriah recalled. Fall arrived, the air turning cold as if foretelling something ominous. Helmand was a hotspot for both the Taliban and nameless entities. Uriah was part of the base defense force, manning guard posts along the perimeter. Each post had heavy machine guns, he recounted, and I worked the night shift. Night in Afghanistan wasn't just darkness. It was a thin veil between the world of the living and the things that lurked beyond. That night started normally. I was standing in the post, scanning the desert through the narrow slit. Just the sound of the wind and my buddy breathing steadily beside me. Peace was often a prelude to a nightmare. Uriah began explaining the communication system. Each guard post had its own radio channel. We called it the side channel. His voice dry but haunting, as if the memory still clung to him. The side channel was where unofficial whispers happened in the night. From warnings about shadowy figures in the desert to idle chatter keeping minds alert. We even told ghost stories over it sometimes. Uriah chuckled softly. Sometimes those stories aren't just jokes. That night, I was on duty at Post Delta, Uriah recounted, his eyes seemingly looking back into the darkness of the Helmand Desert. But then, a soldier at Post Hotel needed relief, and Uriah was reassigned. "Go on, kid." The sergeant clapped him on the shoulder, unaware he was sending him into a nameless nightmare. Post Hotel wasn't like the others. It was located right inside the Afghan National Army compound, Uriah described, his voice tinged with tension. Close in distance, but worlds apart in everything else. Ethan added, that kind of intersection often awakens things best left sleeping. Post Hotel sat next to the HESCO barrier, rough walls made of canvas and steel filled with earth and rock to stop bullets and shrapnel. It looked like a fortress, Uriah said. But standing on that tall watchtower, I always felt a chill down my spine, even when there was no wind. That location became significant when Uriah revealed a horrific event. Just a month or two before I arrived, he recounted, his voice dropping. An A&A truck lost control, flipped, and slammed into the HESCO wall right at the base of Post Hotel. Sudden death often leaves an imprint. Both A&A soldiers died instantly, Uriah continued, his eyes darkening. The truck tore a large hole in the wall, but no one ever fixed it. Like a scar, he mumbled. And perhaps a doorway for something to pass through. Before arriving at Post Hotel, Uriah had heard the ghost stories. Footsteps on the metal stairs at midnight, but no one there, he recounted. Then shadows flickering past the door. So fast, you think you imagined it. Teammates had whispered over the side channel, "Hotels haunted, Uriah. Be careful." But Uriah dismissed it. I didn't care. The Taliban were the real threat, not ghost stories. He gave a weak smile, but deep down, a bad feeling had already begun, like the wind whistling through the HESCO gap. Regulations were clear. Each post required 2 soldiers on duty. Always 2, Uriah emphasized, so nobody goes crazy out in the desert. But the memory of his partner on that first night at Post Hotel had faded. I can't even remember his face, he confessed, his voice tinged with confusion. That first night began quietly. Uriah stood in the post, scanning the desert through the narrow slit in the watchtower. The wind whistling through the HESCO wall sounded like someone sighing.
You hear anything?
He asked his partner over the side channel, but only got a hoarse laugh.
Just the wind. Don't freak out.
Post Hotel wasn't normal, he analyzed. The accident, the unrepaired breach, the rumors, all signs. Uriah didn't realize it yet, but he had stepped into the domain of something not belonging to the living. Uriah's first night at Post Hotel began peacefully, under an Afghan sky glittering with stars, but heavy with danger. He stood in the watchtower, the cold wind whistling through the HESCO gap, like someone groaning in the darkness. Uriah and his partner, a face he no longer clearly remembered, chatted over the side channel, their voices steady to ward off sleepiness.
See anything out there?
He asked over the radio, receiving a hoarse laugh.
Just desert and sand, Uriah.
But his eyes never left the darkness, constantly scanning as instinct dictated. Then, in a moment of distraction, his gaze flickered to the left, towards the Hesco wall torn apart by the accident. Suddenly, his heart skipped a beat. It wasn't the familiar pile of debris, but something standing there, materializing in the thick night like a silent warning. He squinted, trying to pierce the darkness. And then he saw them, two black figures, distinct as real people, standing motionless beside the Hesco breach.
Damn it.
Uriah muttered, his breath misting in the cold air. That was the first sign. Uninvited figures. Uriah tried to rationalize. Probably shadows from the ANA gates, he told himself. 220 yards away, the entrance to the ANA compound was brightly lit by floodlights. But that logic collapsed instantly. It was midnight. ANA soldiers had no reason to be gathered outside. And shadows cast from that distance couldn't be as sharp and compact as these two human shapes. What chilled him more? They stood perfectly still, motionless like statues. No movement, no breath. Like two corpses, Uriah thought, his hand tightening on his rifle grip. He called his partner.
Come here, look at this.
The other soldier stepped over, peered down.
What the?
Both were confused. Intruders, the partner whispered, his voice strained. Uriah nodded. Maybe. Or insiders. Thoughts of ghosts vanished. The real threat was far more terrifying. Uriah raised his M16, switched on his tactical flashlight. The stark white beam, cutting through the night, aimed directly at the two figures. His partner also pointed his personal flashlight at them. Shouldn't that make the shadows disappear? He asked. But Uriah shook his head, sweat breaking out despite the cold. The light hit them directly. Powerful, blinding, but the two figures didn't vanish. "They're still there!" Uriah yelled, his voice breaking with disbelief. Light breaks up natural shadows, but these weren't shadows. They were something tangible, defying physics. Uriah and his partner stood frozen, eyes glued to the two pitch-black shapes. Not fading, not distorting, they stood there, as if challenging the living. Then, as if mocking their confusion, the two figures began to move. Not walking, gliding. Like floating above the ground, Uriah recounted, his voice trembling. They slowly drifted to the left, towards the dark area under the shadow of the ANA vehicles, smoothly, steadily, without a sound. "They don't have legs," Uriah mumbled, the hair on his neck standing on end. His partner grabbed his arm. "See? Not human." But Uriah pushed it away, trying to cling to reason. "Have to check. If it's the enemy, we're dead." He signaled, "Go down there." The partner nodded, gripping his weapon tightly, cautiously descending the metal stairs. His footsteps clanged loudly in the quiet night, a stark contrast to the eerie silence of the two figures. Uriah stayed on the tower, eyes fixed on the dark area, heart pounding like it would burst. A few minutes later, the partner returned, face pale. "Nothing," he said, his voice hoarse. "No one there, no tracks. Everything's normal. But I swear, I felt freezing cold standing down there." Uriah looked at him, then out into the darkness, knowing normal was just a lie they told themselves for comfort. After the fruitless ground check, Uriah and his partner tried to push away the horrifying memory. "Probably just tired eyes," the partner mumbled, his voice trembling, as if weaving a fragile net of comfort amidst the nightmare. But that false peace didn't last. Just minutes later, as they returned to their positions, the two black figures reappeared, in the exact same spot, next to the torn Hesco wall. "There they are again," Uriah hissed, heart pounding. They glided to the left, smooth, ghostly, then melted into the darkness as if they had never been there. This time, no explanation could soothe their fear. They sat there, whispering over the side channel. "Did you see? They're not human." The partner nodded, face white. "I saw, Uriah. But what the hell are they?" The confusion in his voice was like a cold wind blowing through the watchtower. Uriah decided to break the silence, keying the radio.
Post hotel here. We just saw two black figures. Didn't disappear under flashlight. Moved like they were gliding. About 15 minutes ago.
He described it in detail, his voice strained. When he spoke up, he unknowingly invited others into that nightmare. A voice crackled from another post, hesitant.
15 minutes ago. You serious?
Uriah replied.
Yeah, why?
He glanced at his watch, 3:15 a.m. His heart skipped a beat.
The witching hour.
He muttered, remembering old tales about the time spirits rise.
Indeed. The veil is thinnest around 3 a.m.
Uriah, who had always believed in ghosts, felt an icy chill run down his spine.
I think I just saw ghosts.
That night, between 3 and 4 a.m., the two black figures appeared several more times, repeating their deadly glide, like a reminder from the grave. Over the side channel, the guard posts buzzed.
I've heard footsteps at hotel before too.
A voice chimed in.
Probably the two ANA soldiers who died down there.
Another added. A consensus slowly formed. The spirits of the two accident victims still lingered, trapped near the Hesco breach. The next night, Uriah returned to Post Hotel, filled with dread. He told the story to Williams, his old partner from Post Delta. "You're crazy," Williams scoffed, his eyes sparkling with skepticism. "Switch shifts with me," Uriah pleaded. "You have to see it for yourself." Finally, curiosity overcoming doubt, Williams agreed. The second night started calmly. They took over the post, checked weapons, stood in the cold watchtower. Williams shrugged. "There's nothing here, Uriah. You imagined it." Uriah stayed silent, eyes fixed on the darkness, knowing the desert always kept its promises, even terrifying ones. Time crawled by like dripping blood. Then, right at 3 a.m., the heavy atmosphere changed. Two black figures materialized beside the Hesco wall, sharp, motionless. "Look!" Uriah hissed, pointing. They began to glide slowly, eerily, melting into the dark area under the shadow of the ANA vehicles. Williams's eyes widened, but he tried to maintain his tough facade. "Weird, yeah, but there's probably a reason." Uriah shook his head. "You saw them glide, not walk." Williams shrugged, as if logic could dispel fear. "I'm tired. Gonna catch some sleep," he said, turning away. "I got watch," Uriah replied, eyes still glued to the night. Williams wasn't convinced yet, but he didn't know he'd just crossed a line. Those figures weren't just ghosts. They were a warning. Uriah sensed it, even if he didn't dare voice it. The desert was silent, but the cold from the Hesco still seeped into their bones. Williams lay down on the bench, trying to find some rest in the cramped space of the watchtower. Uriah stood behind the machine gun, eyes glued to the pitch-black desert, his breath mingling with the wind whistling through the Hesco gap. Only a few minutes passed, just as Williams closed his eyes, when a terrifying sound ripped through the night. Bang! A dry, violent impact, like someone hitting the tower's support beam hard with a steel rod, making the whole structure vibrate. "What the hell was that?" Williams shot up, grabbing his rifle, face pale. Adrenaline surged, and both Marines snapped into combat mode. Thoughts of ghosts evaporated, replaced by the fear of a real attack. Williams scrambled down the stairs, weapon ready, scanning the base of the tower. "No one here!" he yelled upon returning, his voice strained with confusion. They tried to reassure themselves. Probably just the tower settling, metal contracting, Uriah said. But both knew it was a lie. The sound was too loud, too violent to be natural. Or something loose, Williams added, but his eyes were starting to waver, no longer certain. Williams lay down again, his breathing still ragged. But as soon as his eyelids closed, bang! The second impact echoed, fiercer, like a sledgehammer blow against steel. "Enough!" Uriah yelled, gripping his weapon tighter. Williams looked at him, eyes wide. "What the hell is going on, Uriah?" No explanation could cover the truth anymore. They keyed the side channel, voices trembling.
"Post hotel here. Loud banging, like someone hitting the tower, twice now."
Other posts buzzed.
"Again? We heard about the shadows. Be careful."
Fear spread through the radio waves like wildfire. Just then, Uriah realized his radio battery was dying.
"Corporal, bring up a fresh battery now."
He called over the main channel, his voice urgent. A few minutes later, steady footsteps echoed on the metal stairs. Williams peered down, breathing easier when he saw the corporal appear. The corporal stepped onto the tower floor, battery in hand, but Williams suddenly asked, "Was the sergeant with you?" The corporal frowned. "No, just me, sergeant's in the COC." Uriah turned, seeing Williams' face had gone ashen, his dark skin now pale as ash. "What's wrong?" Uriah asked, but Williams stumbled back, gasping for breath. I saw someone," he stammered, pointing towards the stairs. "Right behind him, following close." The corporal spun around, his face turning pale too, as if the coldness of that thing had just brushed his neck. A deathly silence fell over the watchtower. Williams had seen something the naked eye couldn't catch, a phantom follower, as clear as a living person. All three stood there, freezing, feeling as if the air was being sucked out by an invisible entity. We were terrified, and Williams believed now he saw something too real to deny. The once skeptical Marine now trembled, eyes fixed on the stairs as if fearing it would return. The corporal whispered, "I don't want to come up here anymore." The following night, Uriah flatly refused to return to Post Hotel. "I can't take it," he told his commander, his voice shaky but firm. The request was approved, and he returned to Post Delta, where the desert was still cold. But at least there were no black figures or banging steel in the night. From then on, Uriah encountered no more strange phenomena for the rest of his deployment. A fragile peace lasted a few weeks, with no further reports from Post Hotel or other posts. The fragile peace at Camp Dwyer didn't last. A few weeks later, another chilling story emerged from Post Bravo, where Kyle, a friend of Uriah's, faced the inexplicable. Kyle told us, Uriah recalled, his eyes darkening as he mentioned that night. Kyle was sitting on the steps behind the post, a cigarette glowing in his hand, gaze idly scanning the desert. Suddenly, a small cloud of dust kicked up from an earth berm near the concertina wire, as if someone had kicked it. At first, he thought it was a jackal, Uriah recounted. Those gaunt animals often prowled around the base, howling in the night over scraps of food. "Just a dog," Kyle muttered, exhaling smoke. But then his eyes narrowed as the dust cloud didn't dissipate. It rolled down the slope, growing larger. It wasn't normal, Kyle told Uriah later, his voice trembling. The dust gathered, swirled, and before his eyes it took shape. I clearly saw legs walking, arms swinging, he said, hand clenching his cigarette like a lifeline to reality. That's indicative of an elemental entity, the desert dust its home. The figure made of dust walked across the road, slowly, clearly, then dissipated into thin air like a broken dream. I swear I wasn't imagining it, Kyle told Uriah, eyes bloodshot from lack of sleep and fear. Uriah nodded. I believe you. This place isn't normal. Besides that event, other strange things happened sporadically around the base. One time we heard loud banging on the portable toilets, Uriah recounted, like someone frantically knocking. But when we opened the door, it was empty. Then the machine guns on the berms would swivel on their own, slowly, as if guided by an unseen hand. Uriah and a teammate once sat talking, whispering about these bizarre occurrences. Afghanistan is dead land, the teammate said, his voice bitter. Thousands of years of war. Alexander, Persians, Mongols, British, Soviets, now us. Blood soaks every grain of sand. Uriah nodded, feeling a chill seep into his bones. They reached a chilling conclusion. Maybe the souls can't move on, Uriah whispered. They wander, lost, trapped in this desert. War doesn't just kill the living, it imprisons the dead. I've seen this on many battlefields. That theory was reinforced by accounts from Afghan interpreters. They told us, Uriah recalled, that they saw unreal things too. One once said by the firelight, "On quiet nights I still hear gunfire from the Soviet era, screams, explosions, even though that war ended 40 years ago." It's like the land itself is crying, the interpreter whispered, eyes distant. Uriah shivered hearing it. The sounds of battle echoing crystal clear, even though no one is out there. That's residual haunting phenomena, the memory of the land, replaying unhealed wounds. Kyle, after the night he saw the dust figure, stopped laughing at ghost stories. I saw it, Uriah, he said, his voice hoarse. That thing wasn't a dog, wasn't human. It was something in between. Uriah nodded, knowing this desert wasn't just a battlefield for the living. An older interpreter, whom Uriah respected, once sat with him under the pale moonlight, telling a story both haunting and moving. My father had a friend, he began, his eyes misting with memory, who died fighting the Soviets. Years later, he recounted, his voice trembling, people saw him walking on a Kabul road, entering his old house. Uriah listened, his heart tightening as the man continued. He went to his daughter's bedside, kissed her forehead, then vanished. That's a conscious apparition, not aimless, but carrying a final act of love. I swear it's true, the interpreter affirmed, looking directly at Uriah. He nodded. I believe you. You're not a liar. That story wasn't like the shadows or the banging. It was gentle, yet still chilling, a reminder that death doesn't always sever all ties. Uriah sighed. I wish I could have left it all in Afghanistan. But ghosts sometimes, literally, don't let go easily. When I got back to the States, he said, I thought I was free. I lived with my wife and 2 dogs in base housing, thought everything would be peaceful. But that peace was an illusion. A strange thing started happening, Uriah recounted, his eyes darkening. Every morning, I'd find my wife's shoes crossed into a T-shape right under the bedroom doorway. At first, he laughed. Probably the dogs messing around. But when it repeated weekly, the laughter died. It wasn't the dogs, It was deliberate. Always a T, always on the threshold. That's an attached object phenomenon. Something from Afghanistan followed you. I've seen this associated with such blood-soaked places. The unease didn't stop with the shoes. I never felt alone, Uriah confessed. Like someone was standing behind me, breathing down my neck. He shivered, recalling the unexplained cold in his warm house. It was there, in the shadows, always. I was scared shitless, he said bluntly, not hiding it. The fear changed him. I had to keep lights on all the time, he recounted. Couldn't step into the dark anymore for years after Afghanistan. A fear of the dark took root, like a curse from the distant desert. Particularly the hours between 3 and 4 a.m., the witching hour from Post Hotel, became a recurring nightmare. I dreaded waking up then, he said, his voice strained. I was afraid I'd see something, a shadow or worse. That time isn't random. It's linked to you from that first night, Uriah concluded, his voice firm but haunted. I have other stories. I've always believed in the unknown. He looked into the distance. I don't know what's out there, but the human brain can't comprehend everything. I just know one thing. We're not alone. I lived through it, he affirmed, hands clenched as if gripping reality. From the shadows at hotel, the dustman at Bravo, to the shoes in my house. It was all real. Uriah didn't just see them, he lived with them. And they're still there, somewhere, waiting. Uriah smiled faintly as he told him, things have gotten better in recent years. The obsession from Afghanistan gradually eased, though the memories remained like shadows lurking in his mind. He left the military, now a police officer, a job full of stress and danger. His voice steady. Even facing guns or criminals, nothing scares me more than those nights in Afghanistan. The inexplicable things, they are the real terror. Supernatural fear is different. It attacks the deepest part of the soul. Uriah nodded back, eyes distant. Exactly. You can dodge bullets, but not shadows. The fear of the unknown had scarred him deeper than any physical wound. The host of our show, a former Marine, spoke up to conclude. Thank you, Chris, Sector S.O.S, and Uriah, he said, his voice sincere. You bravely shared things not easy to talk about, the nightmares the desert sent. He chuckled wryly, voice laced with sarcasm. I don't know about Canada, but the U.S. Department of Veterans Affairs definitely doesn't compensate for supernatural trauma. They don't acknowledge invisible scars, a grave mistake, as they are more real than people think. There's no disability rating for a ghost following you home, the host added, his voice bitter. Maybe there should be, but don't hold your breath. The system doesn't believe in ghosts. He sighed, hoping the storytellers had found some peace after their nightmares. He hinted about himself. Maybe one day I'll tell my story. He smirked. I saw a few things through nods, night observation devices on patrol, weird shapes gliding across the desert. But I'm pretty sure it was hallucinations. Only I saw them. Individual experiences are easily dismissed, but when multiple people witness the same thing, like Uriah or Sector S.O.S, it's no longer a trick of the mind. The host nodded. Exactly. Alone, it's easy to doubt, but 3 guys seeing the same thing gives you chills. The military doesn't like bullshit stories, he continued, his voice hardening. You can't go shouting about ghosts and expect anyone to believe you. Your name will go all the way up to the sergeant major, and not because you're a hero, but because they think you're crazy. Suspicion could ruin a career. To illustrate, he told a personal story, unrelated to ghosts, but showing the military's reaction to the unusual. In 2011, I came back from Sere training, he began, eyes glinting with memory. 3 weeks of survival, evasion, resistance, and escape. So harsh, I thought I wouldn't make it. When I got back to base, he recounted, his voice dropping, I was skinny, sunburned, eyes sunken. My buddies looked at me like they'd seen a ghost. You're alive. I just chuckled. Yeah, barely. The system didn't ask how I was. They just checked if I'd quit. The military doesn't care what you went through as long as you stand tall. Same with ghosts. They don't want to know as long as you do your job. But these stories from Chris, Sector S.O.S, Uriah show there are things beyond training or combat. Things no one teaches you how to face. Today I will take you into another dark corner of the military, Sere training, where individuals are pushed to the brink of survival and sanity. The host, a former Marine, once explained to me, they teach you how to survive in the wild, build shelters from branches and mud, set traps for animals. But his voice lowered as he continued. They also teach you how to evade the enemy, and if captured, which you definitely will be, how to endure torture, how to escape that hell. A course that not only tests the body, but delves deep into the mind, where phantoms begin to rise. Suddenly, he stopped talking, his eyes lost in space, as if pulled back to the past. Thinking back now, he whispered, his voice hoarse. It was on the flight to Sere school that I saw that thing. I leaned forward, heart racing. What thing? I asked. He swallowed hard. An unidentified flying object, hovering outside the plane window, glowing brightly like a giant eye staring right at me. He corrected his earlier story. I used to say it was the trip to jump school, but no, it was Maine, through Chicago, then to that cold land. A small detail, but I know supernatural memories often distort like mist in a nightmare. Sere School in northern Maine in mid-March was a frozen nightmare. It was so cold, your breath froze right in front of your face, he recounted, his voice trembling slightly. The snow cover was 8 to 10 feet deep, like a white shroud burying all life. We built fires on the snow, he continued, stacking the wood carefully so the flame wouldn't go out. But the heat melted the snow layer beneath, forming a deep pit. I had studied similar reports, soldiers telling of strange hissing sounds echoing up from those snow pits, as if something had been awakened beneath the ice. He chuckled wryly, but his eyes were haunted. I fell into that pit, he recounted. It was night. I swung my arm to throw more wood on the fire and slipped. The snow was so deep, I hit the bottom and couldn't see the way up. My buddies had to pull me out. I pictured the scene. Darkness swallowing him, the biting cold, and the trapped feeling as if the earth wanted to keep him forever. I heard something down there, he whispered to me after the interview, like scratching on the ice. Was it hallucination, or a buried entity seeking escape? But the cold was just the beginning. The field phase was pure hell, he emphasized, his voice low like wind whistling through the forest. They didn't feed us for at least a week, maybe more. I'm not sure anymore. Hunger made me lose track of time. So hungry his body trembled, he recounted. I chewed bark, gnawed leaves, anything that looked edible. I had read reports of soldiers in similar conditions, starvation causing them to see strange figures in the woods, cryptid entities silently watching from afar, waiting for their prey to weaken. The peak of horror came when he was given food. "They threw me a rabbit," he said, his voice catching. "I had to kill it myself. Break its neck with my bare hands." Hot blood ran through his fingers, his breath mingling with the animal's final gasp. "I wasn't human at that moment," he confessed to me, eyes red. It was raw survival instinct, but I wondered, did that killing inadvertently invite something darker from the deep woods? "My muscles were cramping terribly," he continued, his voice strained by the memory. "I told the instructor and he paused, taking a deep breath. He told me to eat the rabbit's eyes." I frowned, heart pounding. "Eyes?" I repeated, incredulous. He nodded. "He said the eyeballs contained electrolytes, would help me recover." He swallowed hard, eyes distant. "I did it. I bit into it, soft, slimy, foul.